Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. This morning, we're talking to attorney Malcolm Larvadain, and we're talking about all of the criminal acts that we have seen from police officers. Not suggesting that all police officers are inherently bad, because we know that's just not the case. But understanding what our rights are and what we need to know and understand if we encounter police officers. Malcolm has been practicing for well over 2 decades, and we welcome him back to the OPT Network. Malcolm, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Ms. Christmas. How are you doing today?
I'm grateful, and I'm grateful to have you. But before we talk about what we're seeing in today's culture, I want to take you back, because your dad was a civil rights activist for many, many years.
Yes.
So these times are really no surprise to you, because you saw your dad on the front lines.
I had a great teacher, yeah. What we're seeing is really nothing new. It ebbs and flows, and sometimes we forget about the struggle, but the struggle is always there. It hasn't gone anywhere.
Mm-hmm. And one of the cases you were telling me about was a case that your dad had before he went home to be with the Lord, that he had been really battling to see a different verdict. Tell us about the Vincent Simmons.
Vincent Simmons, yeah. Vincent Simmons was convicted of attempted ag rape out of Vincent Parish. And
he was a black man, or he is a black man.
Yes, and the victims are Caucasian. There were some Caucasian teenage young girls, and he was sentenced to 2 50-year sentences to run consecutively. So what that means is after the first 50 runs, and he has another 50. So in total, 100-year sentence. And
so he's from Marksville, Louisiana, forgotten by many.
No, he's not forgotten. Not forgotten. His family is standing with him.
And so how old was he when he?
I think 24, 25.
Okay, and so he's been at Angola for 44 years.
44 years, so he's 69.
And how did your dad come to that case?
Well, I think he's known about it for a while. Vincent's case attracted some attention from some folk up north, and a lawyer by the name of Justin Bonus, a New York attorney, made contact with Vincent and took up the case. Justin then contacted my dad, and Dad was local counsel, and those two have been working to get Vincent a new trial.
Is that going to be predicated on DNA now, or what are they using?
Well, it's predicated on the fact that there were some discovery violations. And what that means is whenever an offense occurs and law enforcement investigates it, they'll talk to various witnesses. And during the course of their investigation, they'll sometimes encounter exculpatory evidence, which is evidence that tends to exonerate you.
Okay.
And inculpatory evidence, which proves your guilt.
Okay. So
law enforcement, whatever evidence that they encounter, they're supposed to provide that to the defense. In this case, there were some violations. And in essence, some exculpatory evidence was withheld.
And so had he been proclaiming his innocence for all these 44 years?
All the while, he has maintained that he is innocent.
So do you think that he will be exonerated eventually?
That's the hope. Judge Bennett granted a motion to recuse Judge Sproul from the case, and that was granted yesterday in Vincent Parish.
Wow.
So right now, there's some motions are pending, and those motions will be heard before Judge Bennett.
Wow. So that is that they're saying that Judge Sproul was biased in some ways?
No, not necessarily. He was necessarily biased. There's some witnesses that the judge knows, and to avoid the appearance of impropriety, it would be best that he not hear
the case,
the pending motions.
Okay. So moving forward, we're in America, we're seeing so many cases of you don't even want to call them police brutality. We're seeing where police are murdering people that get stopped for seemingly And I'm not going to say that any stop is necessarily innocent, but we all watched George Floyd murdered
Yes.
on national television. And so, with that said, is there a way to encounter police better if you are stopped as a black person?
All right. So what you're saying is, can we be good people to the point to where we're not brutalized
Or killed?
or killed? No. No, the onus is on law enforcement to engage people properly. And they need to be properly trained and respond accordingly. So, yes, if you are stopped, you should cooperate. But if you encounter a bad cop, cooperation is not going to make a difference. The issue is making sure law enforcement is properly trained and they see people as humans.
But then isn't there on the police side, the fear now that police have, obviously, of black men?
Yeah, I agree with you. In most officers' minds, the monster of a black man begins in their minds. So when they encounter a black man, many feel that they are encountering a monster. And there's nothing that man can do to destroy or deprogram that monster that white officer has in his head.
So because you are a defense attorney and you fight for people, what do we say that, how do we stop the problem? You know, because how do you know when a police officer is bad until he's killed somebody?
Well, now, you don't have to be a bad officer to kill someone. You know, you have a lot of bad officers who overcharge people. You have a lot of bad officers who unnecessarily harass people. So it doesn't require a body for an officer to be labeled a bad cop.
That's a great point.
So, but do your best to limit your interactions.
And so what does that mean? So you know, you're a black man. My husband is a black man. My son is a black man. You know, what should your encounter with the law look and sound like if you're stopped?
Number one, don't drive and smoke marijuana.
Okay.
A lot of times a traffic stop begins with the whiff of marijuana. And then once that marijuana is smelled, it ratchets up everything.
Don't drive and smoke weed.
Yes.
So once the officer stops you and he smells weed,
he is going to want to search the vehicle.
Okay, and you say no.
Well, then he will then ask for a search warrant, and then make them go through now, a lot of times when they smell the marijuana, that's a belief in their mind that criminal activity has occurred because marijuana is not legal yet. So that could lead to you being arrested because he suspects marijuana could be in your person.
Okay, so because a lot of young people are driving around smoking weed.
Yeah.
And so if you happen to be stopped, should you just own it? Yes, I was smoking weed?
I wouldn't. All
right, we're going to talk more about that on the other side of this break. Stay on point for this very important conversation after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning is attorney Malcolm Larvadain, and we're talking about what we need to understand if we're stopped by the police and what our legal rights are and when we need an attorney.
Yes.
So before we went to break, we were talking about young men, most especially black men, that may be stopped by the police, and maybe they are smoking weed in their car, and they're pulled over for something that is not weed related.
Well, number one, do not smoke in your car.
Okay, but I was smoking.
Okay.
That person was smoking.
Okay.
They get stopped. The police smells weed.
Okay. Well, then the officer more than likely is going to ask to search the vehicle.
And I should say what?
No.
Okay, and then what is the officer going to say?
The officer then would move for a search warrant. Make the officer get a search warrant.
And then when he gets a search warrant, then what?
If he searches the vehicle and finds contraband, you will be arrested. And your arrest could depend on what's found.
And so wouldn't it be just the wise thing to say yes, especially if you know you have weed in the car?
I'm just not going to give him that. I just would not suggest giving him that.
Okay.
I cannot tell you how many times law enforcement officer depends on a criminal just copping out, as they call it, telling them yourself. I would never recommend you tell them yourself.
The less interaction with the police as possible.
Yes, but be compliant, but the less interaction, the better.
So compliant, sometimes cops get angry. And we saw it in the George Floyd case.
But a lot of times cops are on, you see, okay, now, you have two types, generally two broad categories of law enforcement officers. Officers who solve crime and officers who prevent crimes. We don't have enough neighborhood cops who know the people, so that when you engage an individual, it's nice to have some background and know who you're dealing with. A lot of times our law enforcement officers don't know who they're policing.
So in our particular area, I want to make it germane to central Louisiana and even, Alexandria and Pineville, and you were a part of the leadership in our community. Are we doing enough to make sure that officers are trained and that they are more community oriented?
There's more to be done. The present council was moving for officers to receive a pay raise. I'm all in favor of them being paid more money. I mean, let's just be real. It's a dangerous job.
It is a dangerous job.
It's a difficult job. But someone has to do it, and I'm all in favor of them being compensated adequately. However, we don't need the bad actors. We have no place for the bad actors. I want to say the city is about 45, 50 officers down, and you have to slowly rebuild your numbers. You don't want to have a policy where you're taking in bad officers.
And doesn't that seem to be the cycle where an officer has a problem in one town and he moves to another town?
That happens, and we need to make sure that doesn't happen here. We don't want to take on anyone else's problems, because that officer will bring those problems to our city, and we don't need that.
And so what do we do to encourage more black and brown people?
Recruit.
Right, to become officers.
We recruit. You start in high school, you go to colleges, you recruit individuals to be law enforcement officers. You do mentoring. There are ways to get the numbers up. There are ways to solve this problem.
Do you think that we haven't done enough of that?
I don't think we have. But this is an opportunity for us to do the work. And we have to do the work. We have to.
For sure. When you look at when we were growing up, I always believed that the police were there to protect and serve.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing that they're supposed to protect and serve, but you may come home from a traffic stop and you may not, as evidence. And a lot of people would say that's just a small number of deaths that we're seeing. What would you say about that?
Any unnecessary murder is simply unnecessary. I mean, tell that to a mother who's lost her son. Tell that to a father who's lost a son. Tell that to the neighbor, to the sister, to the fellow brother, the church member. We don't need to be losing people unnecessarily to police brutality. It's one life is one too many.
And do you think that people just panic because of fear?
When you say they, who's they?
I'm talking about black men right now and black people that are stopped by the police, and they have expressed their fears.
Well, I can tell you right now, I'm 49 years old. I'm as law-abiding as they come. And whenever a law enforcement officer gets behind me, I get nervous.
And so do you think about in your mind what you will do when you're stopped?
In my mind, I just want to remain calm and be compliant.
Do you want to ask the officer why he stopped you?
Oh yeah, you can, and a lot of times it's advisable to, introduce yourself and then say, well, officer, what's the probable cause for the stop? That's a good question to begin with.
Okay, what's the probable cause
for the stop? And then the officer should answer you and say speeding, or you ran a red light, or you made improper lane change of some sort. A lot of encounters begin with car, vehicle incidents, stops.
And then so you get there, and then he wants your driver's license and your registration.
Provided.
Okay, but now I have a handgun in my vehicle.
Well, you need to declare it, but you need to make sure that you lawfully own it.
Okay, so I lawfully own it and I have it, and how do I say to the officer, I have a weapon?
Okay, and there are two ways to do it. A lot of times, officer will ask you if you have one, and you might want to declare that at the beginning of the stop, that I'm permitted. I have a weapon in my vehicle, and tell the officer where it's located.
And so, from there,
but that's for people who have permit. I would never don't ride around with a weapon with obliterated numbers or a weapon that's stolen. You're asking for problems.
Right. But you own the weapon, and but it's not concealed, because if you don't have a concealed carry, then you have a problem.
Yes.
So if you're driving with a weapon in your car, which is legal, isn't it?
That is legal. Yeah.
But it sounds like you wouldn't advise it.
I would. It just seems that encounters with black men just don't go quite right, even though...
And we saw that with Philando Castile.
Yeah, which was a very disturbing situation.
Because he disclosed it.
He declared it, and after the officer shot him, he really did not render any aid and watched that man die. Watched him die, so it was disappointing. But if you are stopped, declare that you have a weapon. If you do not lawfully own a weapon, I would...
Well, then that's a whole nother story. If you're carrying an illegal
weapon, I would just not consent to a search, and I would make them search the vehicle. Which
doesn't really sound like a good remedy at all, because they're going to find the weapon.
Yeah, but sometimes they won't search. It just depends. But no, I wouldn't just voluntarily give it to them.
Wow. Attorney Malcolm Larvadain is our guest this morning, and we're talking about the legal system and how we can best go through it and come out on the other side. Stay on point. We're back with more right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. This segment is really about us as citizens and the law, and helping us to understand a little bit more what will help us when we encounter police. And I truly believe, Malcolm, that most police are inherently good. And I want to believe that, even with what I've seen and what the world has seen, from police officers. Don't you think that we have to believe that police officers are by and large for the right thing?
I would think so. I would think so. However, we do have some bad actors.
Right.
And at all levels, state, on the state level, parish level, and the city level.
And we can't continue to bury our heads in the sand about what we're seeing. We can't keep, rationalizing away why the police are killing people.
Yeah, it's just too infrequent, But the beauty of it all is we're seeing this because of the cell phones. In the George Floyd case, the young lady who videoed it, I just don't know what the result would have been had there not been a video. I mean, that video really did the trick, and it really memorialized the event.
It did, and it went around the world, and nobody could deny what they saw.
Yes.
In fact, I think it's empowering more people to stop and pull out their phones when they see police encounters.
Well, yes, yes. I mean, there's nothing that prevents you from video an encounter from a lawful spot.
Absolutely. In fact, I did. I stepped out of this building one morning and I saw state troopers right on the road on Government Street, and they had pulled over a truck with 3 young black men that probably were about the age of our son. And I just stood back and I took my camera out because I'm wondering what's going on. Why are there so many police for this one truck? And they were Louisiana State Troopers. And so I take my phone out and I just stand back and I'm just recording the incident. And it turned out well, but it was just what you said. They were smoking weed. And so after they had their encounter with the police, you know, I stopped them and I said, "Is everything okay? What happened?" And they said, "Truth be told, we were smoking weed. He pulled us over for some type of motor vehicle infraction.
Traffic citation.
And they smelled the weed." But he said that the police handled them well. He didn't ticket them and I guess gave them a warning.
Yes, the civil Alexandria, in many instances, you may get arrested for possession of marijuana, but in some instances they don't prosecute. And in the parish, a lot of times they'll put you in a diversion plan of some sort. You know, I mean, we're slowly trending towards recreational use being legal, but we're not there yet. And so that's in Rapides Parish. Now, in other jurisdictions,
could be different.
Could be different.
So let's talk about our juveniles and the opioid crisis that we're seeing in communities around America.
Okay.
We're finding that sometimes juveniles get involved, or teenagers.
Okay. Now, in that regards, what I see a lot of is teenagers smoking marijuana, and you have parents who are using, and the using parent is not able to parent well. And as a result, that child is not getting the guidance and supervision he or she needs. And the last thing you want is for the streets to be raising your child. That happens more too often.
And one of the things that you did early in your career is you took on juvenile cases.
Yeah, I currently do it now.
You still do it?
I still do it now. I was doing that before I arrived here today.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Talk about the juvenile process and, how do we keep our kids from getting caught up in that system?
Well, it starts at home. Mom and dad have to be engaged. Talk to the child. Everyone wants to be on the phone, on social media. Put the phones down, cook some dinner, talk, see what's going on in that child's life, get engaged. Because when you're not engaged, that child is engaged with someone else, and perhaps that person may not be a good influence.
What are you saying to those young people that get caught up in the system early?
All is not lost. All is not lost. In the grand scheme of things, this is just a bump in the road. But learn from this mistake and get better from it. If you do not learn, this could get worse, and you can go from being on the 6th floor of the parish courthouse to the 4th floor. 4th floor is for adults. 6th floor is generally for juveniles.
Are they listening, do you think? Are we
Some
seeing
are.
less?
Well, some are. I mean, there are success stories. But unfortunately, you have some who just do not learn. And you have some juveniles who are incarcerated, and they're placed in group homes.
In group homes.
In group homes. Or OJJ custody. So it happens. It happens.
And so are we seeing a large population of black boys and girls?
I can say in Rapides Parish, we have a really good public defender staff, and we have a really good prosecutor. The prosecutor is Cliff Spears. And Cliff Spears was a juvenile prosecutor for a number of years. So he just flipped sides. But he knows the children, he knows the families. Cliff barks a lot, but he doesn't bite, only when it's necessary. So, you know, he doesn't.
So they're engaged with the community that they're having.
Cliff Spears does a great job. He does a great job. So in Rapides Parish, we have a pretty decent system going. But, you know, every now and then, you know, you do have those unfortunate incidents. And if need be, Mr. Spears will put you away. Yeah.
If need be.
If need be. I mean, well, and also, I mean, Judge Davison does his part. And he shows mercy. He shows mercy. I mean, you know, but it's a difficult job, though. It's a difficult job, you know, because we have, you know, before the pandemic, we were dealing with a lot of truancy. Kids weren't going to school.
Really?
And, you know, it's kind of hard to blame a young child for not going to school.
Sure.
Because that's the parent's job to get them there. But you have some in high school who mom and dad will drop off, and that child just
Walk off?
Will walk off. And that happens. And you have some people who are in custody on probation for not going to school.
Wow.
I enjoyed school. That's where the girls were. So that's I enjoyed school.
So you stayed in school?
Yeah, I stayed in school. Yeah.
And so before we've got to let you go, for those people who need an attorney, you're not just handling defense cases. Tell us about...
I do personal injury, I do bankruptcy, I do some juvenile matters. I do wills and successions. Do some civil service matters. I do some work for a housing authority in Avoyelles Parish. So, you know, I do a wide variety. When people ask me what do I do, my response is I represent people like you.
Wow. And so when do we know if we need a lawyer, Malcolm, before we've got to let you go?
Well,
how do you know? I need to call Malcolm Larvadain.
Okay, well, if you have assets and you want to do a will, give me a call. If you are having trouble paying your bills, give me a call. If you
that would be for bankruptcy.
Be for bankruptcy. If you've been in an auto accident, give me a call. If you've been hurt on the job, give me a call. If a loved one has passed leaving property, give me a call.
Right. So pretty much anything dealing with the law, you can help.
In a lot of areas.
Many areas.
I mean, there's some things I don't do, but there's a lot of stuff I do.
And I think that, you know, we all plan to live, but none of us really plan for death.
And yeah, and that's very important because a lot of our people do not believe in planning for when they transition. And
we're talking about black people especially for this conversation because we don't really like to, in our culture, we don't really like to talk about death because we feel like if we plan, then maybe death might be imminent.
We'll hasten it.
Right, exactly.
But, you know, that's the way we all have to go. So...
and there are no bigger fights than fighting over somebody's property or their money.
Yeah, especially you're fighting over property that you took no step in earning, too.
Right.
You know?
Right. That causes the biggest mess, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So get your will. If you have any legal questions, you can call Malcolm. Malcolm, give them the number where they can reach out and just have the conversation.
318-445-3533, or you could email me at larvadain@bellsouth.net. That's L-A-R, V as in Victor, A-D-A-I-N @bellsouth.net. I'm located at 626 8th Street, Alexandria, Louisiana, 71301.
There you go. Malcolm, thank you for taking the time to just give us a little bit of education and make us really think about if we are stopped by the law and what our rights are and how we should proceed.
Yeah, and just understand, like this was just a basic
it's just that we got to start with the basics.
And this was a basic overview, and depending on the circumstances, the discussion may be a bit more detailed. But just understand, it doesn't take a whole lot for a law enforcement officer to stop you. It can begin with you changing lanes
improperly.
Improperly.
And it's their right, and we just want to make sure that we're respectful of the police and that the police are respectful of us.
Yes.
Thank you so much. We'll have many more conversations.
Thank you for having me.
Indeed.
All right,
Attorney
bye.
Malcolm Larvadain has been our guest, everybody. Stay on point. We're back with more right after this.